In the deep currents of history, as captured in the meticulous journals of Leto II, the son of Paul Muad'Dib, there echoes a narrative of somber magnitude. It was a tale of a crusade, not unlike the ancient and dreadful Butlerian Jihad. Yet it bore the distinct and tragic mark of its era, 10,000 years thence. The Fremen Jihad, under the guidance of the once revered Muad'Dib, unfurled across the cosmos with a relentless tide of suffering, destruction, and death. Leto II chronicled the stark realities of his father's crusade, a ledger of horror and conquest that dwarfed the ancestral terrors of the Butlerian onslaught. With a conservative estimate, the numbers spoke of a ghastly harvest. 61 billion lives snuffed out, 90 worlds rendered barren, and 500 more robbed of their spirit and will. This grand tally of ruin, as recounted with a cold precision that belied its harrowing weight. In these accounts, one could perceive musings of Urania, the chief priestess of the Butlerian Jihad, remarking with a ghostly ponderance that her own holy war, though fierce and unforgiving, paled in the sheer scale of inhabited worlds to enact its fury upon. Such reflections, steeped in the irony of history, suggested that the leaders of the Butlerian Jihad could hold a somber pride in their legacy, despite the more limited theatre of their divine retribution. This narrative, woven through the centuries and captured in the records of Leto, spoke of more than the mere facts of conquest and calamity. It was a portrait of human endeavour, both grand and terrible. So please sit and listen closely as we delve into the tale of the last great holy war. As recorded in the annals and memories preserved from Rakis, a question of profound weight often arises, casting a shadow over the legacies of the two monumental jihads. It is said, with reluctance and sorrow, that the true leaders at the helm of these colossal forces, Jahani Butler of the ancient times and Paul Muad'Dib of the later, were not the willing architects of the massacres that bore their names. Johanna Butler, ensnared in the currents of her age, is often envisioned as a figure of considerable human depth, caught between the fervent zeal of the Komos priestesses and the stark realities of her own conscience. Her leadership, marked by an extraordinary yet burdensome humanness, presents her as a character torn between duty and the gnawing guilt of the inevitable bloodshed. On the other hand, Paul Muad'Dib, the prophesied Mahdi, endowed with prescient vision and strength, faced a paradox that has puzzled scholars and laymen alike. How could a man of such insight and authority, one who saw the weft and weave of the future with such clarity, succumb to the tides of war and violence that his heart ostensibly denounced? The spectre of Paul, grieving the devastation wrought in the name of his holy war, stands as a strong example of the complex interplay of destiny and free will. The inquiry into their reluctances and the moral quandaries they faced invites a deeper understanding of the nature of leadership in times of change, where the line between unwilling participant and instrument of destiny becomes hauntingly blurred, where the destinies of empires are woven with the threads of individual fates. The jihad that enveloped Paul Muad'Dib was not a matter of personal vendetta, but the result of a complex interplay of historical forces. The fabric of the Imperium, stretched across 10 millennia, was held together by a delicate balance of power, a balance of tensions that had long defined the cosmic order. At the heart of this intricate web was the perpetual struggle between the omnipotent imperial house and the appetites of the great houses, each a realm unto itself, yearning for the downfall of the centralized authority that had long curtailed their ambitions. This age-old equilibrium was dramatically upset with the overthrow of House Corino. This event sent ripples of shock and anticipation throughout the aristocracy. For the first time in countless generations, the possibility of altering the ancient regime seemed not just a distant dream, but an immediate reality. As these noble houses perceived the power shift, they were emboldened to assert their long-suppressed desires for autonomy. Ignorant of the actual dynamics at play, especially the underestimated and misunderstood might of the Fremen on Arrakis, these great houses mistook the fall of Corino as a herald of their ascendancy. They envisioned the unfolding events as a call to sever fealty and declare a new order under their dominion. Thus, led by a mix of ambition and historical aspiration, these powerful entities inadvertently created a conflict of epic proportions, setting the stage for a jihad to challenge the pillars of the established cosmos. The great houses, blinded by the mirage of power and freedom, embarked upon a course leading them into the heart of calamity. The ancient Imperium, under the austere rule of House Corino, had long understood the unyielding law of political ambition, regarding it not as a sporadic uprising to be brutally quashed, but as a perennial stream that flowed through the heart of human nature. These rulers of old, often perceived as the iron fist of the galaxy, did not enact punishments to extirpate ambition itself. Instead, they sought to manage this relentless human drive with a measured harshness, tempering the frequency and fervor of rebellious inclinations. The penalties for failed conspiracies and overreaching power plays were thus calibrated not to extinguish the flame of ambition, but to temper its growth, to stymie the incessant reach of those seeking to disrupt the status quo. To view House Corino as a coterie of benevolent thinkers would be a misjudgment of history's complexity. They were instead pragmatic stewards of power, who navigated the perennial storms of political machinations with a cold, calculated realism. Their governance was a delicate balancing act, maintaining the equilibrium of an empire where the aspirations of the great houses were incessantly simmering beneath the surface, always ready to erupt into open defiance. Corino's legacy was astute, albeit ruthless. With their army destroyed and Emperor Shaddam exiled to Salusa Secundus, the vacuum of power left behind would only lead to one thing: war. To the Fremen of Arrakis, the fierce warriors of the desert, this conflict was not a political game to be played, but a sacred crusade. They were not fighting for land or power, but for something far greater: the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. Paul Muad'Dib, in their eyes, was not just a ruler to be supported or challenged based on political expediency. He was the Mahdi, the long-awaited Messiah whose arrival was foretold. They were not merely fighting for territory or revenge. They were fulfilling a destiny that had been in the making for millennia, defending the embodiment of their deepest religious beliefs. The legacy of Harkonnen tyranny and the long-standing oppression by the broader Imperium had forged in the Fremen not just a desire for vengeance, but a collective resolve that transcended personal vendettas. Their faith and history sanctified their struggle, transforming what might have been a mere conflict for imperial control into a holy jihad. So, in their grab for power, the great houses inadvertently ignited a war of unparalleled fervor and devotion. They had expected a political rebellion, but found themselves entangled in a religious war, a jihad driven by the unshakable faith of a people for whom Paul Muad'Dib was not a political figure to be overthrown, but a messianic leader whose authority was divine and absolute. The great houses had underestimated the power of faith, the strength of belief, and the spirit of a people who had been oppressed for generations. The Fremen assaults on the houses were divine retributions, each conquest a step towards fulfilling a destiny long foretold, but only recently embraced. With their unmatched desert guile and combat prowess, the Fremen turned their gaze outward, beyond the sands of their homeworld. World after world fell beneath the onslaught of the Fremen legions. They did not merely conquer, they purged and purified, leaving behind ashes and echoes where once had stood the proud sovereignties of the galaxy's aristocracy. The great houses found themselves outmatched by the desert warriors' fervent zeal and martial superiority. Even the minor houses, less mighty but no less ambitious, were broken and bent to the will of the Mahdi. As the Fremen crusade expanded, it became a force of nature, unstoppable in its divine mandate. Each victory added to the mythos of Paul Muad'Dib, elevating him from a leader of a disenfranchised people to a galactic sovereign with the power to command the fate of the universe. The burning of worlds and the breaking of houses were not merely acts of conquest, but rituals of transformation. Through these fiery trials, the old order was consumed, and in its place arose a new empire, forged in the desert heat and baptized in the fire of jihad. The Fremen, once seen as mere savages of the sands, became the architects of a new universe, one where their Mahdi ruled supreme, and their creed became the guiding light for billions. The conquest of the Malathian system emerged as a pivotal chapter, signaling a shift in the galactic balance. The dominion of Malathian, long held by the illustrious Great House Macnaut, represented a bastion of power and strategy, its rulers embodying the epitome of cautious and wise leadership. Esteemed among the great houses, the Macnauts had cultivated a legacy of political acumen and martial prowess, earning them the dual reputation of being both a formidable ally and a dangerous foe. The sizable and disciplined armed forces of House Macnaut stood as paragons of Landsraad military excellence, their training and tactics honed through generations of careful preparation. Their strength was further bolstered by alliances with three lesser houses from the neighboring system of Kalach, creating a formidable coalition that had long deterred the ambitions of rival powers. In the aftermath of the explosive battles for Malathon and Kalach, whispers of the unthinkable began to permeate the corridors of power, carried on the breath of the few hundred souls who had witnessed the unimaginable and lived to tell the tale. The once mighty forces of the Macnauts and their stalwart allies had not just been defeated, they had been eradicated, swept away by a storm of bloody violence. The architects of this seismic upheaval were the Fremen. With only 10 legions, roughly 300,000 warriors, they had achieved what seemed impossible: the obliteration of the combined military might of two entire systems, a force more than tenfold their number. This staggering victory, a feat of tactical genius, bordered on the miraculous and shook the foundations of established military doctrine. Yet, the tremors of fear that spread among the remaining great houses were not merely due to the scale of the Fremen's victory, but also to the realization of the untapped potential behind it. Long realized before by Duke Leto I, desert power. Unbeknownst to the more expansive universe, the elite Fedaykin, the most fearsome and revered Fremen warriors, had yet to participate in these battles. Their absence spoke of a reserve of power still at hand, a depth of martial capability that, if unleashed, promised to redefine the nature of warfare and power. In those nascent days of upheaval, the Fedaykin remained a mystery, their existence just a rumor. At the same time, the Fremen themselves were widely misunderstood, their culture and motivations obscured by the sands of Arrakis, from which they hailed. Rebellion flared like wildfire across the galaxy, with the Fremen at its heart. As these warriors of the desert traversed the stars, from one planet to another, from one system to the next, they were confronted with a mosaic of beliefs and practices. These encounters often revealed faiths strikingly alien to their own. In this kaleidoscope of spiritual diversity, the Fremen found themselves as conquerors and pilgrims amidst a universe teeming with ideological plurality. Over time, as the tally of conquered worlds and affected lives swelled into the millions and then billions, the religious fervor of the Fremen began to assert itself with increasing prominence in their conquests. Initially driven by the secular goal of establishing their Mahdi, Paul Muad'Dib, on a stable throne, their campaign gradually morphed into a larger, more complex crusade. Paul and his desert warriors, encouraged by their rapid ascendancy and guided by a prophetic destiny, found little reason to harbor any sentiment but disdain for the Bene Gesserit, an order whose manipulations had sought to engineer their very existence. The Bene Gesserit, facing the daunting reality of their meticulously laid plans, unraveling before the very figure of Paul Muad'Dib, felt their grasp on the future slipping. The emergence of a Kwisatz Haderach, whom they could not sway nor subdue, represented an intolerable affront to their centuries of careful scheming. Their response, born out of desperation and the fear of obsolescence, was as drastic as it was definitive. They resolved to eliminate Paul, aiming to reset the cosmic chessboard and spawn another being of his ilk, one they could hope to control. Thus, in the volatile arena of the Molitor system, a showdown unfolded, pitting the combined might of the Landsraad houses, still unbroken and aided by the Bene Gesserit, against the indomitable force of the Fremen. Here, the remaining Sardaukar, the fallen Corino dynasty, joined the fray, lending their martial prowess to the coalition of houses to stem the Fremen tide. Yet in these battles, the legendary Fedaykin, Paul's elite guard and the cream of Fremen martial might tipped the scales decisively. Their involvement transformed the conflict from a stalemate into a triumphant victory for the Fremen. While monumental in its scale and impact, the campaign that had engulfed the system of Molitor marked merely the zenith of the Fremen Jihad under Paul Muad'Dib, not its conclusion. Across the galaxy, numerous systems lay untouched by the change, their allegiances and beliefs yet unswayed by the burgeoning doctrine of the Desert Prophet. The reach of Muad'Dib's religion, as fervent and widespread as it had become, still had frontiers to conquer and worlds to convert. The Shizara Tafwid, the Fremen priesthood, now viewed the Jihad not merely as a divine mission of conversion, but as a celestial mandate to disseminate their faith across the stars. In the eyes of the faithful, the true measure of victory was not the cessation of conflict, but the universal acceptance of their creed. Notably, the aftermath of the pivotal Molitor campaign saw the demise of most of the 40 faiths that would eventually succumb to the relentless tide of the Fremen crusade. The legions of Fremen continued their sacred task with a zeal undiminished by distance or time. Even as Paul Muad'Dib returned to the sands of Arrakis, his warriors, imbued with the spirit of their Mahdi, traversed the galaxy. They moved with the autonomy of faith and the singular purpose of their holy mission, ensuring that the Jihad's legacy would resonate through the cosmos. As the final fires of war faded and the last contingents of Fremen warriors made their way back to the arid embrace of Arrakis, the galaxy stood transformed. The tumultuous campaigns had ceased, giving birth to a new era under the aegis of Emperor Paul Muad'Dib, the Mahdi, whose vision now extended beyond the sands of his native world to encompass the entire human cosmos. The old balance of the great houses, with its intricate web of alliances and rivalries, had unraveled, leaving in its wake the unchallenged dominion of the Fremen Emperor. The ancient regime of House Corino, with its sophisticated power alongside the Landsraad, had become a relic of a bygone epoch. The political and military machinations that had once defined the galaxy's order were now obsolete, swept away by the irresistible tide of Muad'Dib's revolution. The myriad religions that had dotted the spiritual landscape of the universe were merging into a single, overwhelming creed, with Paul at its heart, his word the gospel, and his will the divine command. In this new world order, the military might of the universe had condensed into one formidable force, loyal solely to Muad'Dib, rendering all other armies irrelevant. The political, social, and economic structures that had once jockeyed for influence and control had given way to a singular, unified governance, with Muad'Dib's vision as its guiding principle. Paul's awareness of the impending jihad came through his visions, which provided glimpses of a future soaked in blood, carried out in his name across the universe. Records have said that Paul was deeply conflicted. He was burdened by the knowledge that his leadership might lead to fanaticism and widespread violence. Despite this, he is compelled by the Fremen's belief in him as their prophesied leader and savior, which fuels their zeal and aligns with their long-standing desire for vengeance against their oppressors. Attempts to navigate a path that would minimize violence or steer the future away from the jihad. His efforts, however, are constrained by the political and social dynamics at play. The Fremen see Paul as the Mahdi, their destined leader who would lead them to freedom and glory. This role is thrust upon him by destiny and the culture and expectations of the people he leads. This realization that the jihad was inevitable comes with his understanding that all paths he could see led to some form of massive conflict or upheaval, as influenced by his actions and the immense following he had garnered. His prescient visions show not only possible futures, but also the tremendous impact of his leadership on the Fremen and the broader universe. This forces him to confront the paradox of his existence. While he can foresee and manipulate specific outcomes, his ability to prevent the Holy War is limited by the very powers that enable him to predict it. After his rise, once powerful organizations in the Empire diminished or changed. The Bene Gesserit lost influence and control over events. The Spacing Guild became tools of Muad'Dib, losing autonomy. The Landsraad, a political power, was hollowed out by sweeping changes. Charm, the economic engine, was under Muad'Dib's direct control, ending covert wealth and influence conflicts. The exquisite balance that had given the ancient Imperium its dynamic life and meaning had dissolved into a monolithic governance structure, centralized and dominated by the new emperor. In this new era, the power, the shadowy intrigues, and the multifaceted rivalries that had once moved the galaxy were now mere memories, overshadowed by the Fremen Emperor's singular vision and unchallenged authority. The Fremen Jihad is a pivotal chapter in our history, encapsulating a period of profound transformation and upheaval. The consequences of the jihad extended far beyond the immediate military victories. It catalyzed significant changes in social structures, religious practices, and economic systems across countless worlds. The jihad also left an indelible mark on the cultural and spiritual life of the galaxy, as the teachings of Muad'Dib permeated diverse societies, influencing beliefs and ideologies long after the battles had ceased. It truly was the end of history, as the once mysterious Fremen spread their flame and might through the galaxy that for thousands of years would stand unchanged to follow the golden path.